So here we are, Josh Foreman, Rose Foreman, and I'm close to being done with figuring out where the continents are. After this, and so a lot of that is figuring out the tectonic movements that got them to where they are and where they're going. And all of that drives where mountain ranges are, and mountain ranges drive where climates are, and climates drive where biomes are, and biomes drive where cultures can and cannot live, or what kind of cultures will live there. All of these things kind of are pending getting this thing figured out. I got a ton of really great feedback from someone who actually has studied and understands tectonic plates. And he highlighted a couple places that I need to look at. So I want to try to address those today. And we're also going to talk about, we have 11 books written for the series so far. And where, only one of them published. We'll get to the rest as fast as humanly possible, given the constraints of reality. But yeah, so far, everything in the first book that's been published has been this little island and this little island in here, and that's where we've left off. So, but yeah, most of the books, I believe, take place on this continent, more or less. And I'm making sure that the geography matches what we intend to do with the story. Geography drives political conflict, where isthmuses are and where harbors are and where resources are. All of these things kind of create the drama of human history, and in this case, Talifar history. So anyway, I want to start by dealing with these things. So what we have going on, all these crazy colored lines, are the places where the plates, these are the, plate tectonics is this idea that the planet Earth, and in this case Talifar, which is pretty much Earth, but in a different configuration, where the continents are, where they've smashed into each other and pulled apart, and where some are subducting under others. So the red zones are the subduction areas where blue is where plate is being generated. Red is where it's being eaten, basically by colliding with another plate and diving under it and then kind of melting, dissolving away.
Like off our coast of the Pacific Northwest, it's subducting.
Yep.
And sort of shoving up.
The whole Cascades.
So that we have the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, so we've got all this crust here diving under. Well,
and creating, of course, the ring of fire, the line of volcanoes that goes along the coast of Western Americas.
And here, this is kind of what I was basing my lines on. This is a very simplified version of Earth plates, and these indicate the speed at which they're moving. I don't think I'm going to go that far, simply because there's too much I don't understand about that stuff. I could easily sink another couple of months into figuring that out, and I'm not going to do that. So, because this world map needs to be figured out before I do the maps for book 2, and the maps for book 2 have to be done before book 2 comes out, and getting book 2 out is a huge priority. So, here is where we have a problem. Yellow lines are transform boundaries. So that is where the plate is not being created like that, or squished together like that. It's where it's sliding.
Sliding along, as in California.
Yeah, and sliding is not really the right word. What it's doing is it's kind of caught, and there's pressure being exerted, pressure, until it pops and moves a little bit, and it just does that. Over geological time, it's a slide, but from a human perspective, it's very stationary until suddenly there's a big earthquake and things move. So what the geologist I was talking to was saying is that you do not have transform faults going through other types of faults. That it can
Oh, so those
happen.
places you have crossing,
Yeah.
he's saying that's not going to work.
So also triple junctions are a thing that exist, such as here where three lines come together. Here's another example. Here's another example. You don't have four. You don't have crosses. That just doesn't exist. It can exist very temporarily, but it's not stable at all. And my thought with this was that, if this crust is being created at a slightly different speed than this, you would naturally get a transform fault there. But my thinking on it is very rudimentary, so I'm not surprised that I just guessed wrong. So anyway, so what I have to try to figure out is how to, and this has been very tricky. This has been like putting together a puzzle, because the lines can't. Here's another problem. I have a line going from blue, so crust is being created, to red, and you can't just stop there, because you have to think what's causing these is circulation happening in the soft hot rock underneath. It's creating convection cells.
The flow of magma.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's not, because there's so much pressure, it's not actually liquid. They're still solid rocks, but it's softer because of the pressure and heat, so it can still have convection cells in there.
It can ooze.
Yeah. I've watched so many lectures on plate tectonics now that a lot of they use a lot of food allusions to it, where it's a porridge that's boiling slowly in a kettle, or it's if you pour a pile of syrup on a plate and then sprinkle baking soda over that. The baking soda is kind of like the crust floating on top of that, and if you tilt it and move it, you'll see it break apart and squish back together. And so,
what a nasty way to waste food.
if it's for science. Anyway, so I've got to figure out. And I didn't just draw these lines arbitrarily. I came up with shapes of continents that I thought were interesting, that would lead the eye and create evocative, like, ooh, I wonder what could be there. Ooh, I wonder what, that sort of thing. And then I started laying in tectonic, the plates, and then from there I had to add or subtract things from my original continents. This whole chain here was caused because once I put the continents in, I see there's stuff subducting here, therefore it must be bubbling up and creating a archipelago, because after the crust dives under, it melts and then seeps back up, usually between 50 and a couple hundred miles off of that. Everywhere that crust is being created, such as here, it needs to subduct somewhere else, for the most part. So that's another question that I had that I finally got answered recently by going to Quora. So Africa, as an example, has, look at this. It's almost completely surrounded by divergent, the blue. So crust is being created and pushed into Africa.
Pushing Africa together.
So that was what I thought. I was like, you can't just keep pushing and pushing with the only place where crust is being subducted is this little area up here compared to all this area. It doesn't make sense. The answer is this is relative to everything else. So while crust can be pushing in, if crust is being pushed out here slower than here, although it's usually pretty equal, but the continent can the plate itself can be growing in size relative to the other ones that are being pushed away while that grows.
And the other plate can be shrinking slightly.
Right. So for instance, the South American plate here is going this direction, but it's being pushed over this other one. And likewise, the Australian plate is being pushed away, but being subducted under there. So, you can't look at a single plate and say this plate can't work, the proportions can't work, because you have to consider how all the other plates are being crunched around it. So all of that to say, if crust is being created, it's going to be subducted somewhere else, usually, but not always the case. So I think I
wonder why they didn't show the Great Rift in Africa.
Yeah,
where,
a lot of them
where
don't.
It's slowly separating. I ate at a restaurant there, where this long Lake Tanganyika is. It's kind of a stunning visual to see how it's you can almost see it coming apart.
Right, because
how come that map didn't show that?
Well, this is a very simplified one here. Actually, surprisingly, most of the maps don't show that, and I'm not sure why. That's another thing I've been meaning to ask people, but yeah, you can see all this red here. This is where Africa is starting to pull apart. The eastern part is starting to pull apart from the western part.
Okay.
But and then that in. It probably.
So you're doing this so that you can understand the landforms that you see above the ocean.
Correct. Oh, so these islands over here now are where I was thinking most of the other sea predators.
Correct.
Would live, and the South Ills, pretty much all the other islandy type nations, right? The Sunbelters are within the 20-degree latitudes, more or less. Yeah. Yes.
I think you're going to have to add more archipelago-y things.
Okay.
There's a section that's called Lacy Islands, and I don't see something that would be called Lacy Islands.
It's not lacy enough for you? Okay. Well, that's why it's good to have you here. So I can do that real quick. This is how I've been adding land so far. Let's create a new document.
It seems like there's a lot less ocean area on Talifar than there is on Earth.
Yeah, so that was a concern, was I definitely wanted to keep those consistent. So when you see it on a globe, I think the continents are spread out more than on Earth, because if you add all, so this is almost an Atlantic, and this is almost an Indian, Ocean, and this is almost a Pacific, but then there's this whole pretty large chunk down here that is mostly water. So I don't know how to calculate that, but that's a good observation, that and I could easily go in and reduce the size of any of these continents to get it, especially these ones that are not mentioned in any of our books yet. They could be anything, or they could not exist at all. So yeah, okay, so let's get some Lacy Islands for you.